In the heart of the galaxy, amid the vast stretches of stars and planets, humanity was all but forgotten. Long ago, humans had been pushed to the edges of the cosmos, once mighty civilizations scattered across distant moons and forgotten colonies. The powerful alien empires had swept through the galaxy like an unstoppable storm, and humanity had learned to survive in the shadows, their light dimmed by the weight of their conquerors. But deep within the darkest reaches of space, there remained a flicker of hope, a hope that no one truly believed in. The humans had a leader now, and though his voice was soft, it was beginning to reach places no one thought possible. His name was Commander Elias Quinn. Quinn was not a man of extraordinary power or great wealth. He did not lead the largest fleet, nor did he command the most advanced technology in the galaxy. But there was something about him, something that made people listen when he spoke. For years, the galaxy had been under the rule of the Voltrasi, the Zenith Alliance, and the Zyphar Syndicate. These alien factions controlled entire star systems, and their reach extended to the farthest corners of space. They were powerful, intelligent, and ruthless. Their forces were unmatched, their fleets enormous, and yet humanity had survived. Commander Quinn had never forgotten what humanity had once been. He remembered the ancient stories of the first human explorers who had ventured out to the stars, the pioneers who had fought for freedom, for hope, and for the promise of a better future. His mission was to bring that spark back, to waken humanity from its long slumber and remind them of who they were. On the bridge of the Aegis, the flagship of the human fleet, Quinn stood looking out at the stars. His eyes were focused, yet there was a quiet sadness about him. He had seen the fall of humanity, watched as entire worlds had been wiped away by the alien forces. But he had also seen the resistance, the small pockets of humans scattered across the galaxy, surviving against all odds. And he knew, deep down, that it was time to unite them. Captain Reynolds. "Initiate the broadcast," Quinn said, his voice calm and steady. Captain Lyra Reynolds, a skilled officer who had been with Quinn from the beginning, nodded and activated the communications system. The signal was broadcast across the galaxy to the farthest reaches where humanity still clung to life. It was a simple message, but it carried with it the weight of everything that had come before. We will unite, and when we do, the galaxy will know our name. The words were soft, barely a whisper compared to the thunderous roars of alien empires. But in their simplicity, they carried a profound power. There was no promise of immediate victory, no grand declaration of war. It was merely a call to action, a call for humanity to rise up and stand. Together, Quinn's message spread like wildfire, on a small mining colony deep within the Volta Nebula. Juno, a young engineer, sat in her quarters. The walls were cold, the air thick with the scent of metal and dust. She had spent years here, hiding from the brutal forces of the Voltrasi. They had crushed her homeworld, forcing her people to work in the deepest mines, extracting resources for the alien empire. Juno had never been one for resistance, not after the fall of her planet. She had seen her family taken, her friends lost, and her home burned to the ground. Hope had long since died in her heart. But now, as she listened to Quinn's voice on the broadcast, something stirred inside her, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. We will unite. And when we do, the galaxy will know our name. What? Her breath caught in her throat. She had heard rumors of the human fleet, of a commander who was gathering the scattered remnants of humanity to fight back. But she hadn't believed it. She had thought it was just another dream, a story told by those who refused to accept the truth. But this was real. For the first time in years, Juno felt a spark of hope. She rose from her chair and rushed to the com station. Her fingers moved quickly, and within moments she had sent a message to the nearest human outpost. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She couldn't ignore this call. She couldn't remain in hiding forever. Across the galaxy, Quinn's words reached the ears of other humans. In the dark corners of space, in forgotten space stations and hidden colonies, the broadcast echoed. Some listened with skepticism, others with fear. The alien empires had made it clear that humanity was nothing but a nuisance of species to be eradicated. But now, for the first time in centuries, there was a glimmer of something else: defiance. On the Obsidian Star, the flagship of the Zenith Alliance, Admiral Trask stood in the command center, staring at the broadcast. He was a towering being, his mind sharp and calculating, his reputation one of ruthless efficiency. He had led the Zenith to countless victories, and the idea that a single human could challenge the might of his empire was laughable. And yet, there was something about Quinn's voice that unsettled him. It was not the threat of weapons or armies, it was something deeper, something more dangerous. It was the spark of a revolution, the idea that humanity was not just a defeated species. Perhaps the humans had been scattered, broken, but they were not gone. We have received a transmission from the humans. One of Trask's officers said, his voice tinged with unease. It's a message from their leader, Commander Elias Quinn. Admiral Trask's expression hardened. What does he want? He says they will unite, and when they do, the galaxy will know their name. Traska's lips curled into a thin smile. Is that so? He said, his voice dripping with disdain. The humans believe they can unite against us? Let them try. They will learn their place in this galaxy soon enough. But even as he spoke, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a warning. He had underestimated humanity before. Perhaps he had made a mistake in thinking they were weak. Back aboard the Aegis, Quinn stood at the helm, looking out at the stars. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. The galaxy was vast, and the alien empires were powerful. But he had seen enough to know that humanity was not a species to be underestimated. They had survived, even thrived, in the face of oppression and hardship. Now, it was time to fight back. Captain Reynolds, prepare the fleet. We begin our journey. Reynolds nodded and turned to her crew, her voice steady and resolute. All hands brace for the start of something new. As the Aegis slowly began to move, the stars ahead seemed to shimmer with possibilities. The journey would be long, the battles many, but Quinn was certain of one thing: humanity had only just begun to fight, and the galaxy would soon feel the tremor of that first step, back in the depths of the galaxy. In places where the stars barely shone, the message was spreading. The resistance had begun to stir, and humanity was waking up from its long sleep. They were scattered, broken, and tired, but they were not finished. And as they rallied around Quinn's words, they realized something that had long been forgotten. They were not alone in the days to come. The galaxy would witness the rise of something that no one had expected: humanity's return. And though the empires may have dismissed them, they would soon learn that the spark of rebellion was far stronger than they could have imagined. The stars had always been silent, distant points of light in a dark sea of space. But to Juno, who had grown up on the cold, lifeless moon of Gathra, those stars now seemed to speak in a language she hadn't understood for years. The message from Commander Quinn had sparked something inside her. Feeling she thought she'd buried long ago, she paced back and forth in her small quarters aboard the Revolution. The ship she had been assigned to for the past 5 years, the walls of the ship, like the rest of her life, felt cold and uninviting. The hum of the engines, the only constant sound, seemed to be a reminder of how far away humanity had fallen. But Quinn's words had cut through that silence like a blade. We will unite. And when we do, the galaxy will know our name. Juno stopped pacing and stared at the flickering screen. The message had been brief, but it had sent shockwaves through her mind. She had never believed humanity would rise again, not after what happened to Gathra, not after watching the Voltrasi crush her people under their boot. But something in Quinn's voice, something about his conviction, made her believe that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a future for humanity. Her fingers hovered over the controls. Could she really do this? Could she leave the safety of the mining colony and join this cause? A sharp knock at the door broke her thoughts. Juno, called the voice of Captain Leda, the leader of the Revolution's small crew. We've got a situation, Juno sighed, turning away from the screen. What is it? Captain Leda's face appeared on the screen. Her expression was hard, but there was a spark of something Juno couldn't place. The fleet has been gathering. There's talk that Quinn is calling for a meeting of human leaders. They want to discuss what happens next. No? Juno's heart skipped. A meeting? She repeated. When? Tomorrow. They want all human fleets to converge on the center of the Vulture Nebula. We'll be joining forces with others. It's a huge opportunity, Juno, but it also means we'll be taking a risk. Juno's hands clenched into fists. The decision was clear, but it was terrifying. She had spent years hiding, surviving, waiting for the day the Voltrazi would finally come for her. But this was different. This wasn't about survival. This was about standing up for something greater than herself. I'll be there, she said, her voice steadier than she felt across the galaxy. Quinn's words were having an effect no one could have predicted. Though the message was simple, the call to unity was powerful. Resistance groups that had once fought alone, scattered and weak, were now beginning to merge. Hidden fleets, secret colonies, and rebel stations were connecting, sharing resources, and forming a larger, more organized movement. The human resistance was no longer just a group of desperate fighters. It was a force, and it was growing stronger every day. On the Aegis. Quinn stood at the command console, reviewing the reports. He had always been a patient man, a thinker. But now, as his message began to take root across the galaxy, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing harder upon him. We're ready, Commander Captain Reynolds said as she walked into the room, her expression serious but resolute. The fleet is gathering as planned. We'll have a full armada by tomorrow. Quinn nodded, his gaze still fixed on the star charts. And the resistance forces? He asked, his voice low. They're responding. We've received messages from several cells. There's a group from the Zenith-controlled planet of Arctos, and one from the Zyphar Syndicate sector. They're all on their way to Vulture. Quinn allowed himself a small smile. The pieces were falling into place, but he knew it was only the beginning. There was still so much to do, so many risks to take. They'll be here soon, Quinn said, turning to face Reynolds. And when they are, we need to be ready to act. Meanwhile, on the fringes of the galaxy, the alien empires were beginning to take notice. The Voltrazi in particular were growing uneasy. For centuries, they had ruled with an iron fist, suppressing the human race and other lesser species under their control. They had never worried about humanity until now, in the Voltrazi capital. High above the surface of the capital planet, Emperor Trachis stared at the broadcast he had received from Commander Quinn. The human's voice had been soft, but it held an unmistakable power. We will unite. And when we do, the galaxy will know our name. The Emperor grunted, tapping a sharp claw against the metal table. This human, he muttered. He dares to challenge us. His advisors, a collection of Voltrazi officials and military leaders, shifted uneasily in their seats. They had seen humanity as nothing more than a pest, something to be crushed underfoot. But Quinn's words had shaken their confidence. For the first time, they were unsure. Emperor, perhaps we should take this seriously, said Vorel, one of the Empire's military commanders. These humans, they're beginning to unite. We've seen their resistance movements grow in strength. If they manage to gather enough forces, enough. Trachis snapped, slamming a fist onto the table. We have crushed them before, and we will do so again. Let them gather. Let them think they have a chance. But when the time comes, they will fall. There was a brief silence before one of the advisors spoke again. But Emperor, they are gathering forces quickly. Perhaps we should send a fleet to intercept them before they have the opportunity to meet. Trachis paused, considering this. He had always prided himself on his ability to keep the galaxy under his thumb. But Quinn's message had struck at something deeper. Perhaps the humans weren't as weak as they seemed. Perhaps they were capable of something far greater than they'd ever shown before. We'll send a fleet. Trachis finally decided, but not to destroy them, not yet. I want to understand what they're really planning. Back on the Revolution, Juno watched the stars outside the ship's window. The journey to Vulture Nebula would take several days, but her mind was already racing. The moment the fleet converged, they would be faced with an impossible choice. Attack the alien empires directly, or focus on gathering even more strength. Both options were risky, and neither could guarantee victory. What if this doesn't work? She asked softly, almost to herself. Captain Lyta, standing beside her, glanced at her with a reassuring look. "You've fought for your life this long, Juno. What's a little more risk?" Juno chuckled, but it was a hollow laugh. The fear was still there, lingering in the back of her mind. They had no idea what the galaxy's response would be, or what forces they would face. But one thing was certain: this was no longer just about surviving. This was about fighting for something far greater. It's the future of humanity. The fleet would arrive at the Vulture Nebula in 2 days, and from that moment forward, everything would change. As the fleets began to converge and the resistance movements united under Quinn's leadership, one thing became clear: the human race was no longer just a shadow in the galaxy. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with. And soon, the empires of the galaxy would feel the tremors of humanity's return, with Quinn's message sparking a new movement. The first step toward unity had been taken. The galaxy was on the brink of something new, something dangerous. The human race was no longer content to hide in the darkness. They were coming, and they were determined to make their mark on the galaxy, and that was only the beginning. The moment the Revolution and the other human ships entered the Vulture Nebula, the atmosphere aboard the fleet shifted. It was as if the very stars themselves held their breath. The once scattered forces of humanity were now assembling an organized force, ready to take on the might of the galaxy's alien empires. And Commander Elias Quinn was at the heart of it all, his calm demeanor steadying the fleet as they gathered for what could be the most important meeting of their existence. Juno stood at the observation window of her ship, her mind racing. The ships around her were diverse, ranging from old freighters to newer, more advanced warships. But each one carried with it a history, a story of survival and struggle. These were the people who had been pushed to the fringes of the galaxy, forced to live in hiding or fear. But now, united under Quinn's banner, they stood together as one. As the fleet slowed to a halt, the stars outside seemed to swirl in a dance, their light faintly illuminating the nebulous clouds. The meeting would begin soon. Juno had never been a part of something this large, this important. She was still unsure about her place in this grand movement, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. This was her chance to make a difference. "Juno, come on, Captain," Lita called, her voice cutting through the silence. "It's time." Juno turned and nodded, following the captain down the hallway to the main briefing room. The other fleet commanders were already gathered there, talking quietly among themselves. Quinn stood at the head of the room, his expression calm, though there was a fire in his eyes. He had brought them together. Now, it was time to decide their next steps. "Everyone," Quinn said as he looked up, his voice soft but commanding, "thank you for coming. We are not here just to talk. We are here to make a stand." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. "We all know the threat we face. The Voltrasi, the Zenith, the Zyphar Syndicate, they think they have us beaten. But together, we can prove them wrong. Together, we can show the galaxy that humanity is not a species to be underestimated." There was a murmur of agreement, but it was clear that the room was still uncertain. The empires they were about to face were powerful, and even with their combined forces, victory was far from guaranteed. But for the first time in a long while, Juno could feel the spark of hope spreading. She wasn't alone anymore. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his 40s stood up from the table. His face was worn, his uniform showing signs of heavy use. "Commander Quinn, I'm with you. But we have to ask ourselves one thing. What exactly are we fighting for? Our survival, or something more?" Quinn's gaze never wavered. "We're fighting for the future. For the freedom of every human being scattered across this galaxy. If we don't stand up now, we will fade into the history books as nothing more than a footnote." This one came from a woman who had been silent until now. "I agree with Quinn, but we need to have a clear plan. We don't have the luxury of mistakes." "We don't need to be perfect," Quinn said, his voice steady. "We need to be united. The first step is taking back control of the Vulture Nebula. It's a key location that the Voltrasi use for their trade routes. If we can disrupt that, it will send a message to the galaxy. A message that humanity is not just surviving. We're fighting back." A heavy silence fell over the room. Disrupting the Voltrasi trade routes would be dangerous. They would be facing an enemy far more powerful than anything they had ever fought before. But Quinn's words were clear. This was their first step. "We will strike tomorrow," Quinn added, his tone unwavering. "I've sent the coordinates to each of you. We strike fast, we strike hard, and we leave no trace. The Voltrasi will be too busy recovering to react in time." Juno swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the decision. She had been part of small-scale skirmishes before, but nothing like this. It was one thing to fight for survival in the shadows, but to openly challenge the Voltrasi. It felt like an impossible task. Still, she could not ignore the fire that had been lit inside her. She could no longer stay in the background. This was her chance. "I'll be ready," she said, her voice more confident than she felt. The others nodded, and soon the meeting came to an end. As the fleet commanders filed out of the room, Juno lingered for a moment, looking back at Quinn. He was already poring over the data, making final adjustments. Juno knew this wasn't going to be easy. She didn't know what would happen once they attacked. But she knew this was the first real opportunity humanity had to change the course of its future. Meanwhile, light years away, on the capital planet of the Voltrasi Empire, Emperor Trachis was fuming. His advisors had just informed him of the human fleet's movement, and the news had sent a cold wave of anger through him. "They dare move against us." Trachis' voice rumbled through the room, his claws tapping against the cold stone of the throne. How dare they? One of his top military commanders, Vorel, stepped forward, trying to remain calm despite the Emperor's rage. "It seems they have gathered more strength than we anticipated. The humans are attacking the trade routes in the Volta Nebula. It's not just a resistance movement anymore. It's a direct threat." Trachis growled low in his throat. "Send the fleet. Crush them. We will show these humans that they are nothing but ants beneath our feet." But there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The Voltrasi had underestimated humanity before. This time, they couldn't afford to make that mistake again. Still, he was confident that their power would crush the human uprising. After all, how could a scattered group of ships stand against the might of the Voltrasi? Back in the Volta Nebula, the human fleet was preparing. The final hours before the strike were tense. Juno stood on the deck of the Revolution watching the preparations. She could feel the nervous energy in the air, the uncertainty, and the fear. But she also felt something else, something new. It was hope. It was hope in the form of a united front, a group of people determined to fight for something bigger than themselves. "We're going to need every ship we have," Captain Lita said as she approached. "The Voltrasi won't go down without a fight." Juno nodded, her hand resting on the railing. "We can't afford to hesitate. This is our chance." Just as she spoke, Quinn's voice echoed across the ship's comm system. "All ships, prepare for launch. We move in 30 minutes. Let's show the galaxy who we are." With those words, the fleet sprang into motion. Juno felt a rush of adrenaline, her heart racing as she followed her crew to the command deck. The time for hesitation was over. They were about to strike a blow that could change the fate of humanity forever. As the fleet moved into position, the stars around them seemed to shine brighter, as if the universe itself was watching. They were no longer just humans hiding in the shadows. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy, for their future, and for their freedom. And with that, the first step was taken. The strike on the Voltrasi trade routes was only the beginning. The message was clear. Humanity had risen from the ashes. The tremor felt across the galaxy was just the first shockwave. The galaxy would soon understand the power of a united human race. The hum of the Revolution's engines was a constant reminder that they were moving into enemy territory. Juno stood by the observation window of the ship, her fingers lightly brushing the cool glass as she gazed out at the stars. The tension in the air was thick enough to feel. The upcoming mission, the attack on the Voltrasi trade routes, was humanity's first major strike since Commander Quinn's call for unity. And every part of Juno's being was alive with anticipation. She had been a part of resistance movements before, but never anything like this. She was no longer fighting for scraps of survival. This was different. This time, they were fighting for something larger than themselves, fighting for the future of humanity in the galaxy behind her. Captain Lita entered the room, her boots echoing on the metal floor. All ships are ready, Juno. The fleet is set for the operation. Ouch. Juno turned to face the captain, her expression serious. And the Voltrasi? Are they expecting us? They'll know soon enough, Captain Lita replied, her voice steady. But there was an unmistakable glint of uncertainty in her eyes. We're hitting their primary trade routes in the Volta Nebula. This will be their first major confrontation with us. But it won't be easy. The Voltrasi are not an empire that backs down lightly.
Ow.
Juno nodded. She understood the risks. A successful strike would send a message, but it would also put them on the radar of the most dangerous military power in the galaxy. They would have to be quick. They would have to be decisive, at the head of the fleet. Commander Quinn stood at the bridge of the Aegis, watching the vast starscape ahead. The entire human resistance was counting on them. This mission was more than a simple attack. It was a statement. It would show the galaxy that humanity was no longer weak, no longer on the run. We have one chance at this, Quinn said softly, turning to Captain Reynolds, who stood at his side. If we succeed, the Voltrasi will be forced to reevaluate everything they think they know about us. Reynolds gave a firm nod. And if we fail... Quinn's eyes narrowed as he turned back to the view of the stars. We won't fail. Not today. The entire fleet, though vastly outnumbered by the Voltrasi, had one advantage. Surprise. They had spent weeks carefully planning every movement, every strategy. Quinn had taken great pains to ensure that their strikes would be fast, precise, and coordinated. The Voltrasi would not know what hit them. We've got multiple targets in the sector, Quinn continued, pointing to the holographic map. Hit them fast. Hit them hard. Disrupt their operations. The longer we keep them distracted, the more time we have to make our move. Not yet, but it was a calculated first strike, and it would reverberate through the galaxy. They would make their mark far across the galaxy. In the heart of the Voltrasi Empire, Emperor Trachis was seething with anger. The news of a human attack had come through just hours earlier, and the reports were now flooding his command room. They've attacked the trade routes, Commander Vorel said, his voice strained. Their fleet was smaller than expected, but they managed to disrupt our shipments. Trachis stood from his throne, his large figure towering over the others in the room. This is an insult. We've allowed these humans to exist in the dark corners of the galaxy, and now they dare strike at the heart of our empire? Emperor Vorel began cautiously. The humans have more strength than we anticipated. Our intelligence was outdated. They've been gathering forces in secret, forming alliances. Trachis snarled, his sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. I'll make them regret this, he growled. Send the fleet. Let's show these insects who they're dealing with. He turned to his other advisors. We'll deal with the Aegis and its fleet first. Once that's done, we'll crush the rest of the human resistance. They're too scattered. They're too weak. But even as he spoke, a nagging thought crossed his mind. The humans were unpredictable. The attack had been well executed, and it was clear that Quinn, their leader, had something more planned. The Voltrasi had underestimated humanity before. Trachis was not willing to make the same mistake again. Commander Vorel, assemble the fleet. We're going to deal with this threat before it grows any stronger. Back on the Revolution, the countdown had begun. The fleet had arrived at their destination in the Volta Nebula. Every ship was in position, waiting for the signal to strike. Juno stood in her seat, her hands gripping the armrests. She felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. There was no turning back now, Captain, she said, her voice steady. What happens if the Voltrasi send reinforcements? We won't give them the chance, Captain Lita replied. Once we strike, we'll be out of there faster than they can react. We're not here to stay. We're here to make a statement, Juno nodded, swallowing hard. The plan was simple. They would hit the Voltrasi trade routes, destroy their supply lines, and then disappear into the nebula before the Voltrasi could send reinforcements. A quick, decisive strike, one that would leave the Voltrasi reeling. All ships, prepare for launch, Captain Lita ordered. As the Revolution and the rest of the fleet engaged their engines and moved into position, Juno felt a wave of determination wash over her. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for freedom, for a future in the stars. The attack on the Voltrasi trade routes was swift and brutal. Human ships, some barely holding together after years of conflict, tore through Voltrasi convoys, cutting through their defenses with the precision of trained warriors. The Voltrasi, caught off guard by the speed and ferocity of the assault, scrambled to respond. Juno's heart raced as she watched the chaos unfold. The Voltrasi forces were much larger than anything they had ever faced before. But the humans had the advantage of speed and surprise. They struck quickly, took down the enemy's defenses, and then disappeared into the nebula before reinforcements could arrive. From the command deck, Captain Lita's voice was sharp and clear. "All ships, we've hit the targets. Now we're out of here. No lingering." But as the fleet prepared to retreat into the depths of the nebula, something unexpected happened. On the edge of the Volter Nebula, a massive Voltrasi fleet appeared, its warships glowing like dark stars against the backdrop of space. Reinforcements had arrived far sooner than the humans had anticipated. Quinn's voice came through the comms. "All ships, regroup. We need to get out of here now." But it was too late. The Voltrasi had them surrounded, in the heart of the Aegis. Quinn stood at the command console, watching the new developments unfold. "This isn't what we planned for," he muttered under his breath. The Voltrasi fleet was much larger than he had anticipated, but he couldn't let that shake him. "Captain Reynolds, prepare for evasive maneuvers." "We need to buy time for the rest of the fleet." "Understood," Reynolds replied, her voice calm but tense. "We won't be able to hold them off for long, but we can give them a fight." The battle was about to get much harder. What was supposed to be a quick, decisive strike had now become a fight for survival. The Voltrasi were here in full force, and the odds were no longer in humanity's favor. The battle in the Volter Nebula raged on. The Voltrasi fleet, massive and relentless, had surrounded the human resistance, trapping them in a web of firepower. The humans had launched their surprise strike on the Voltrasi trade routes with precision and speed. But now, the tables had turned. The odds were no longer in their favor. On the bridge of the Aegis, Commander Quinn's eyes were sharp, his mind working at full capacity as he analyzed the situation. The Voltrasi were closing in fast, and the human fleet was running out of options. Quinn's hands gripped the edge of the command console, his thoughts racing. "We need to get out of here," Quinn muttered, his voice calm despite the chaos unfolding around him. "But we can't let them destroy everything we've worked for." Captain Reynolds, standing beside him, looked at the screens displaying the Voltrasi ships. "We've got one chance. If we can break through their lines, we might make it to the outer edge of the nebula. From there, we can disappear into the black." "Not everyone can make it," Quinn replied, his voice tight with the weight of the decision. "We can't abandon the fleet, but we can't afford to lose this battle either." For a moment, silence fell over the bridge. Then, Quinn's expression hardened, his decision clear. "No, we don't abandon anyone. We fight." Meanwhile, aboard the Revolution, Juno's heart raced as she watched the Voltrasi ships close in around her. The Revolution was a sturdy ship, but it wasn't built to withstand the full might of the Voltrasi fleet. Juno's hands gripped the controls, her breath steady as she tried to focus. "Captain Lita," Juno said, her voice steady, despite the fear rising in her chest. "What's the plan? How do we get out of this?" Captain Lita's face was grim, her expression unreadable. "We don't get out of this, Juno. Not without a fight." Juno swallowed hard, but she didn't back down. "I'm with you. Whatever it takes." The captain's lips tightened into a thin line. "Good. We'll fight. We'll give them everything we've got." Just as she spoke, the sound of alarms blared across the ship. A series of Voltrasi warships had flanked them on the right, cutting off any chance of escape. Juno could see the cold, calculating precision in the Voltrasi fleet's movements. They were methodical, designed for war. "Juno, take us in close to their flagship," Captain Lita ordered, her voice sharp. "We're going to hit them with everything we've got." Juno's heart skipped a beat. "Are you sure about this?" "We're outnumbered. They don't have a choice," Captain Lita replied. We fight to the end. If we go down, we'll go down fighting. Back on the Aegis, Commander Quinn watched the human ships around him prepare for the final stand. His mind raced, but his face remained calm. This wasn't the plan he had envisioned. But in war, things never went according to plan. The Voltrasi were too powerful, too numerous. But humanity had something the Voltrasi didn't: a fierce will to survive. All ships. Prepare to engage, Quinn said over the comms. We fight together. We break through this, or we don't break at all. His words were a rallying cry, echoing through the fleet. The human ships, though smaller and less equipped than the Voltrasi warships, began their attack with renewed purpose. They weren't just fighting for their survival anymore. They were fighting for something greater. They were fighting for the future. Juno's voice crackled through the comms. Commander, we're ready. Let's make this count. Do your best, Juno, Quinn said, his voice steady. We're with you. The battle was chaos. Explosions lit up the dark expanse of space as human ships engaged the Voltrasi with everything they had. The Voltrasi fleet, though vast, was not prepared for the speed and unpredictability of the human resistance. The humans used their smaller, more agile ships to outmaneuver the enemy, striking with pinpoint accuracy and then disappearing into the nebula's dark clouds. Juno's hands were steady as she piloted the revolution. Weaving through the firestorm of enemy ships, she could feel the weight of every decision, every maneuver. One wrong move, and they would be lost. Firing torpedoes. She shouted, launching a barrage of weapons at the nearest Voltrasi ship. The explosion lit up the darkness, a small but satisfying victory. Nice shot, Captain Lita said, her voice full of approval. Now, let's take out their shields. Juno nodded, her focus never wavering as she continued to dodge enemy fire and launch counterattacks. The human fleet had become a swarm, attacking with a coordinated frenzy that took the Voltrasi by surprise. It wasn't perfect, but it was effective. On the Aegis, Quinn watched the battle unfold, his eyes scanning the movements of both the Voltrasi and his own fleet. The Voltrasi were formidable, but the human spirit was something the enemy had underestimated. They fought with everything they had, knowing this was their one chance to prove they were more than just a forgotten species. Captain Reynolds, Quinn said, his voice calm but determined. Prepare for a final push. We can't keep this up forever. We need to break through now. Reynolds gave a sharp nod. Understood, Commander. We're ready, Quinn turned to his crew. This is it. We make a run for the outer edge of the nebula. Once we're out of here, we'll have a chance to regroup. But we have to move now. Human ships pushed forward, cutting through the Voltrasi defenses with renewed ferocity. Juno, her heart pounding, steered the revolution toward the outer edge of the nebula. They were almost there, just a few more minutes. They could escape the battle and live to fight another day. But the Voltrasi weren't about to let them go that easily. A massive Voltrasi warship, larger than any Juno had seen before, appeared in front of them. It was blocking their escape route, its weapons primed and ready. We're trapped. Juno shouted, her voice tinged with panic. Captain Lita's face was grim as she assessed their options. We don't have the firepower to break through that thing. But we can't stop now. We have to go. Juno's hands flew over the controls as she aimed their ship directly at the Voltrasi flagship. We're going straight through them, she said, her voice steady now. We have one chance. Do it, Captain Lita ordered, with a fierce determination. Juno steered the revolution toward the heart of the Voltrasi fleet. As they closed the gap, the Voltrasi flagship fired, but Juno had anticipated the move. At the last second, she veered the ship to the side. Dodging the incoming blast and sending the revolution speeding past the enemy, the Voltrasi flagship exploded in the distance. As the human fleet made its final push toward the outer edge of the nebula, the battle had been won not in the way they had planned. But it had been won nonetheless. Hours later, the human fleet had retreated into the darkness of deep space, their ships battered but intact. Commander Quinn stood at the observation window of the Aegis, staring out into the vast emptiness of the galaxy. We did it, Captain Reynolds said softly, a tired smile on her face. We survived. Quinn nodded, his gaze never leaving the stars. We've shown the galaxy that humanity is not a footnote. We are not done yet. And though the battle was over, the war was far from finished. Humanity had taken its first major step toward reclaiming its place in the galaxy. And from that moment on, the galaxy would know their name. The humans had fought back. They had survived. And they would not be forgotten.